Welcome to the 2023 Fleece-Lined Quilt Along. I'm Laura Struck from Made Peachy, and over this series of videos we're going to work towards creating a sampler quilt. This 9-block sampler quilt features a selection of products from the Fleece-Lined quilting range, and each video will walk you through the process of start to finish to create each unique quilting block. Block number 3 in the sampler quilt is an offset log cabin design, and this has been created using Fleece-Lined QuickScreen Square. Block number 3 in the sampler quilt is an offset log cabin design, and we're going to be using the Fleece-Lined QuickScreen Square to create our block. The supplies we need for this block are a selection of fabrics in light and dark prints, and one fabric to use as our focus point in the corner of the block. Also going to need a rotary cutter, ruler and mat, and a piece of the Fleece-Lined QuickScreen Square. So this is a non-fusible interlining, and it has a printed grid on one side, and it's this grid that we're going to use to get the neat placement and use as stitching lines. To create the offset log cabin block, I've cut a piece of Fleece-Lined QuickScreen Square to 21 squares by 21 squares, and this is going to give us our finished 8-inch block for our quilt. The Fleece-Lined QuickScreen Square is printed on one side and it is plain on the other side, unprinted. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using it with the unprinted side uppermost to place our fabrics, and we're going to be stitching on the reverse using these grid lines as our stitching guide. I prepared some fabrics for the log cabin, so we have a 2-inch square which is going to be our focus point, and I've cut some strips from the different coloured fabrics, and they are approximately 1.5 inches wide. Traditionally with a log cabin we start from the centre and we work around, building up layers and layers of fabric to add our different colours. So it'd be working on the lights on one side perhaps and the darks on the other. With this log cabin we're actually going to be shifting the focus over to the side, so I'm going to place my first piece, the focus piece, over here in the bottom left hand corner. I'm going to take my first piece of fabric and I'm going to place it right sides together on top of the focus piece. I'm going to secure that in place with a pin. Now turning the work, I'm going to be taking this over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to use a straight stitch, and I'm going to stitch all the way along this line here, so one line in from the raw edges of the fabric. Just work a straight line of stitching there to incorporate that first piece into our log cabin. At the sewing machine I've brought my needle down onto this first line, so here is my focus square and this is the first grid line in, and that's going to be my stitching line. So I'm using a size 80 needle and a 50 weight thread, and I've opted for a 2mm stitch length. So with my needle down I'm going to stitch all the way along. Now I've ensured that I've set my pin at this side to the right of my stitching line so that I don't catch it with my needle. So working all the way along. Now that seam's been worked, I can turn the project over and remove the pin. And when I slip this fabric back over, we can see the first element has been created. I've got a bit of excess fabric here, so I'm just going to ease it back and using some scissors just carefully snip away the excess. Now we can either use the iron here or we can finger press this section open and prepare to lay our second portion of fabric. The second element in the block is going to be worked along this side here, and I want to continue with the same fabric. So taking the offcut piece, I'm going to place it right sides to right sides. Again, I'm aligning it with the grid and I'm going to pin carefully in place. Now you'll notice here the fabric doesn't quite reach the grid line. Now that's not going to be a problem because we're going to be using the line below when we create our seam to add the next element in on that side. So I've pinned my second piece into place and I can now turn it over. And when I take it to the machine, I'm going to be working along this line here to secure that element into place. So back at the machine, we've brought the needle down to work our stitching along this grid line. We're going to follow all the way to the end here. I've just taken a moment just to double check that my pin is out of the stitching line. So just a straight line of stitching all the way to the end. With our second piece of stitching completed, I'm going to remove the pin and I'm going to just snip away this excess fabric on one side. And now I'm just going to push these sections open. I'm going to take the time now to just bring the iron over and give those a press. So now that the first element is completed, I can then move on to make my second element. So I'm going to start here and work along. So I'm going to rotate the work and taking my next fabric, I'm going to position it right sides to right sides and pin in place. I'm going to take this over to the machine and working with the grid side uppermost, I'm going to take a straight machine stitch and work all the way along the line, one grid line in from the edge of the fabric. Now the seam's been worked, I can turn everything right sides uppermost and I'm going to clip away the excess. And just push that open to reveal the next element in the block. So once the piece has been added, you can finger press or press with an iron just to neaten up each stage as you go. With this design, we're going to be working on one side and then the other to create this diamond effect that builds across. So I'm going to take my fabric and position it right sides to right sides. And secure with a pin. And turning it over, I can just have a look and see that I'm going to be working one line in all the way across. Of course, you can just make a little mark so you can see that you're starting here and you're working all the way to here. Use a pen that's either water soluble or air erasable pen so you can see where you're stitching, and that will show you your stitching guide. Now the seam has been worked on the wrong side, we can turn it over, remove the pin, again snipping away any of the excess fabrics. I'm saving each of the pieces that I cut away and using them for subsequent elements of the block, and I'm just pressing everything up and away from that focus block. So now that we've worked both sides in our initial shades, we can move on to another shade, and I'm going to take my next fabric and I'm going to position that right sides together, and it's going to work all the way across here. So we're going to pin that in place, again flipping and stitching. So here you might like to use your pen to just pop a little marker to show you exactly where you're stitching up to. And taking it to the machine, it's just a straight stitch along that marked grid line. Now that this element here has been secured, I'm going to return over to this side with my next fabric. I'm going to place it right sides to right sides, and I'm going to pin it on the right side, and I'm going to turn and stitch on the reverse. And once I've done that, I'm going to carry on adding fabrics following my pattern sequence here of the different colours, just working around each side in turn until the block is covered. Once all of the elements have been stitched on in the same way, we've got a completed block. We just need to trim up some of these edges. So taking a rotary cutter and ruler, we can use the grid on the wrong side as a guide. Because we've got the grid here, we know it's going to be completely square, so I'm just going to use that as a guide and carefully trim down each of these edges, just removing the excess fabric each side of the block. Taking our trimmed block back to the ironing pad, we can just give all of the seams a nice press, and our offset log cabin block is now ready to quilt. Be sure to check out the other videos in the series to create all 9 blocks of your sampler quilt. You can find our Quilt as you go method video in the series also, and this will show you how to piece together your finished sampler quilt. Thank you so much for joining me for the Vliesling 2023 Quilt Along. You can find out more about the Vliesling products on the Vliesling website at vliesling.com, and you can follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube at Vliesling UK. You can find me online at madepeachy.com. Please do share your projects online and tag us in your makes. We do love to see them.